Okay. All right. I want to welcome everyone to another Freight Advisory Committee meeting. We're excited today to start talking about the draft freight element of the long-range transportation plan. And I'm going to kick it right over to Wendy, and she's going to dive into the presentation.
All right, let's go straight to the agenda. Holly, please. Well, it's good to see everybody. I know it's been a long summer off. We're excited to have released the draft freight plan. So we've got kind of a mixed agenda today. We've got a guest speaker. We have Alice Beatty from High Street Consulting, who worked with the state of Alaska to update the freight bottlenecks. So she's going to kick off our meeting today and kind of review the freight bottlenecks. And then that'll be a great segue into our conversation about priority freight plan projects from the Freight Advisory Committee perspective. So you'll kind of have some bottlenecks in the back of your mind. We're also going to give you an IIJA update, the new funding bill and some of the requirements, which will help inform some of those priorities. And then we're going to review the list that the Freight Advisory Committee gave us for projects and see if we can come out with your top priorities. Then we'll just kind of have an open discussion on the general freight plan, and then what the next steps are. So today is really going to be necessary for all of you to participate when we have those open discussions. A key deadline to keep in mind is the Freight Advisory. Oh, sorry, I keep getting the Freight Advisory Committee and the freight plan mixed up. The freight plan needs to be submitted to the Federal Highway Administration on October 27th. So we've got a few deadlines and a few things that we need to get update to meet the new bill requirements. It seems frustrating to everyone that we started a plan 2 years ago and the new guidelines really came out this summer of what has to be in a freight plan, but we are required to meet those and there's no reason we can't before October 27th. We have, I'd say, about 95% of them covered in our freight plan, so we just have to do a little dusting up. I know Joe's interested in the freight plan parking, so we'll kind of go over some of that as well. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Alice, and she's going to talk to you about bottlenecks.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Wendy. Again, my name is Alice Beatty. I'm with High Street, and we've been working on sort of a parallel effort for some of the performance management and reporting with the state of Alaska, including identifying the freight bottlenecks. You can go to the next slide, please. My portion of your agenda today, I'm going to try to keep it really brief since it sounds like you have a lot to discuss later. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the methodology that we use to identify the freight bottlenecks, and then just give you a preview, high-level look at the locations of the identified bottlenecks. You can go on to the next one. So we really used a two-pronged approach to identify these problem locations for the movement of goods via truck freight throughout the state. The primary method was through stakeholder input, and that was through talking with the metropolitan planning organizations for both the Fairbanks and Anchorage urbanized areas, as well as consulting with the Alaska Trucking Association. So you'll see throughout the next couple of slides that there's two different maps for most areas, one showing the stakeholder identified bottlenecks. And then the second way that we looked to identify bottlenecks was to actually examine the truck travel time data that's available through the National Performance Management Research Data Set, and look at that in two ways. One of them was identifying locations that had very high annual truck delay per mile, so calculated as the difference between the average travel time for trucks compared to an estimated free flow travel time times the number of trucks that might travel on that segment, normalized by the length of a segment. So that captures recurring congestion, those types of issues. And we also looked at the truck travel time reliability, which you might be familiar with, which is the 95th percentile travel time over the 50th percentile travel time, and capture those unreliable segments where it's difficult to plan a trip because it could take you 5 minutes, it could take you 20 minutes because there's such a variation between the longer travel times and the 50th percentile. So we filtered based on both of those to identify those locations that had issues with both the delay and the reliability. And now we can go to the next slide. Thank you.
Morning, sir.
So starting with Fairbanks area, these were the locations identified by the stakeholders. As you can see, there are several in Fairbanks proper, and I'm not going to try to read all of them, but they are listed on the right-hand side as well, because labels didn't quite all fit on the map legibly. And then several others along the Richardson Highway in the North Pole area. Just a second to review that, and we can always go back to it. The next slide shows an overlapping set of segments that were identified using that travel time data, similarly along Alaska Route 2, the Stees Highway and Richardson Highway, going north-south on, I think that's the east side of Fairbanks. The next slide is outside those MPO areas, but in Wasilla and Palmer, the truck travel time data identified a couple of segments that experienced that higher delay or unreliability in terms of travel time. So the Glen Highway in Palmer and then East Parks Highway going through Wasilla. And then finally, we'll move to Anchorage. And again, these are the locations identified by the MPO and some of the freight stakeholders that we were able to consult with that are known problem areas for trucks trying to move through Anchorage for various reasons. And then we did a similar data analysis using the same delay and reliability measures to see if there's any other locations that maybe were not as obvious to stakeholders, but might still be causing issues for the travel time and delay for trucks moving through Anchorage. So as I said, it's a pretty brief overview of what was identified and how we did it. I don't know that we are planning to take questions or feedback at this time, but I hope that these are meaningful and valuable as you move forward into your next part of the discussion with Wendy.
I think are there any questions or surprises? It seems pretty consistent with what we've heard from the Freight Advisory Committee and through our reporting. Does anything jump out to anyone? Anything missing?
This is Brian Lindenberg. You didn't look at any bottlenecks or delay issues or waterborne air traffic or rail?
Correct. These are just truck freight, and it's federally required to report truck freight bottlenecks specifically.
Okay, so you're federally required for those, but you're ignoring the rest.
I don't think that we're ignoring the rest. This is one specific requirement that we're reporting on right now. So it's not a case of ignoring this. Has to be reported to the feds to receive funding for highways. So this is just one segment of everything that we're looking at. Joe, did you have a question?
Yes. If this is just a requirement and it doesn't change, what our priorities would be and what funding would be for certain projects, I got no real comments besides when we started this. Well, I'll make it real quick. Bridges are bottlenecks because sometimes you can't get weight across certain bridges. And when we were looking in the Fairbanks area, there's a couple troublesome bridges that, though the numbers of trucks might be not, the data might not show that, getting important freight that's heavy across certain bridges are definitely bottlenecks.
So hold on to that, Joe, because that's what we're
Okay.
going to talk about for priority projects. And this is just about travel time, right? So this is one very specific metric that has to be reported. It does not paint the whole picture. So we do document those bridges as different kinds of bottlenecks, if you will, in the plan, but it doesn't account for this travel time reliability metric that has to be reported.
If it's just a reporting thing, then I'm fine. But I think that is there another factor that factors in, waiting on trains and some of the bottlenecks that happen down at the port?
Alice, did you consider any of that in this?
We did not particularly in this analysis. I think that there can be considerations for like geometric bottlenecks and weight restrictions like you're mentioning on those bridges. That was not something that we incorporated here, but it could be done in future analysis.
So we're really sharing this as another tool to help inform the priorities. So we'll kind of keep this in mind. This is another data point that says, okay, we've got probably some congestion, or, I mean, we can look at these areas. Most of us know what they mean, why it takes a while. So this is just one more data point to help us prioritize freight projects. And then I think
Go ahead, Jody.
Thank you.
But again, you're only prioritizing highway freight projects at that point.
That just for, yes, this is one data point. This is not the whole plan by any stretch of the imagination. So this is to get the national freight funds for the highway.
So
And it is a
similar
required
question to
element
another
of the
mode?
freight plan. All right, we still have a lot more to cover, so let's go to Jody, and then we're going to come back to some of your other questions, Brian.
Thank you, Wendy. So this analysis looked at only current conditions. Is that correct? It did not anticipate any forecasts. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so we may kind of come back and forth to these slides just to kind of help inform our priority project discussions. All right, so in terms of priority freight projects, the freight plan has to have a list of fiscally constrained priority projects. So this is where we can get into all of the other modes, get into the meat of this just a bit more. One thing I do want to talk about a little bit is just the new infrastructure bill, the next slide, Holly, and some of the updates that we're going to have to do to the draft plan that you've already reviewed. So some key modifications that we have to make to that plan is we have to add strategies to decrease to address how the freight plan is going to decrease the severity impacts of extreme weather and natural disasters. So how can we mitigate that through some of our projects and policies? The impacts of freight on local air pollution, impacts of freight on flooding and stormwater runoff, and on wildlife habitat loss. So these will be some new strategies and policies. The other key piece of the new IIJA update is parking. And so we did talk a little bit about parking. Currently, DOT does not provide any parking facilities for freight, but the freight plan must address the capability of the state working with the private sector to provide adequate parking facilities and to document the underlying causes of parking shortages. So what the freight plan did say is, based on our previous discussions, is there were probably some needs for freight parking along the highway between Fairbanks and Anchorage, and also some locations on the Richardson Highway, and then also on the Dalton Highway. It was very generic. It did not list specific locations. So we can talk a little bit more about that in our open discussion. And then we also, oh, look, I have the same strategies twice. So we can just delete the second half of that slide, and those are the only things that are missing from our freight plan right now. So currently, how are the freight projects documented in the draft plan? They're really from the current STIP. The STIP already demonstrates the fiscal constraint, and it documents the National Highway Freight Plan investment and matching funds. What it also includes is kind of eligible but unfunded projects for future programming. And so those are kind of the laundry list of projects that were provided to us by AMATS, FMATS, Department of Transport, FMATS, Fast Planning, sorry, Jackson, and Department of Transportation and this Freight Advisory Committee. And so that is really kind of the heart of the discussion that we want to tackle today. So right now, the only fiscally constrained project that we have in the freight plan is the Dalton Highway that is carried over from the previous STIP because it is fiscally constrained. We need to add new projects to this list. So the next slide shows some proposed screening criteria to help maybe kind of think about how we can prioritize freight projects. This criteria was proposed in the freight plan in the draft for comment. It is not 100% sure this is what is going to be used, but really looking at safety, the network. So is a project on a primary network? Does it have funding diversity? Does it have intermodal connectivity? Does it connect rail, freight, airports, and the ferry? Is it supported by local land use plans? And does it reduce delay? And kind of going back to those freight bottlenecks. So these are just some of the ideas that we're thinking about of how to help us prioritize these projects. And I see lots of questions in the chat. Mark, you wanted to answer Joe's question about what does fiscally constrained mean? Please do.
You bet. So the STIP, the requirement when we publish the STIP, it has to be fiscally constrained. In other words, it has to fit within the funding that the state expects to receive from FHWA each year, year over year. So let's just say it's 300 million, and that's just a notional number. The STIP, the projects that are listed for next year, so federal fiscal year 23, have to total 300 million. That's what fiscally constrained means. And that includes both construction and design.
Thanks, Mark. So if we're looking at just National Highway Freight Plan funds, so again, this is leaving out, I understand that this is leaving out some of the other modes right now, but it is one key piece we're looking at. If we just look at National Highway Freight Plan funds, we're looking at about 17 million per year, give or take. And Eric and James, if I get any of these numbers wrong, please pipe in. Now, with the new bill, there's a lot of other money out there. For example, to improve railway crossings, there's about 1.2 million per year. There are also a lot of grants that are coming forward. So there's a lot of different ways to address this money, or address these projects. What's really unique about this new bill is there's funding directed to ports. There's a huge emphasis on resiliency and connecting the different modes together. So there's a little more leeway on how some of this funding can be used to really connect the modes and think about them differently. Another question? Are we good? All right. So with that, these are the priorities that this group previously identified that we should spend just a little bit more time on. So we have the Parks Highway Alternative Corridor, the Wasilla Bypass, a road to Juneau. We're not making any value judgments yet, right? This is just what we have heard through all of our interviews with the Freight Advisory Committee. The bridges on the Richardson Highway, the height and weight restrictions, funding way stations for 24-hour operation, truck parking areas, again, bridges that are constricting movement, the Chilitna and the Eagle River. Improvements outside the Port of Alaska. So this is really kind of going back to what Jody said too, this connection from the Port of Alaska to the railroad and to the airport, especially with the current airport expansion happening. And then rerouting the railroad main line around Fairbanks. So there may be more projects. This list is, 6 months old, I think, since the last time we met. There may be some changing priorities. So this is a great time to have this group kind of chime in and give us some feedback. And if nobody talks, Holly and I will start calling on names. Thank you, Jody.
I'm happy to talk. One of the things I think about is in the summertime during construction season, there's a whole bunch more truck traffic. And I don't know if that's considered freight, if it's hauling dirt and gravel and that kind of thing. But it seems to me like that might be a consideration, especially in congested areas and through residential areas, etc. Thanks.
Thanks, Jody.
Any other
If
comments on
someone
this? Go ahead.
Rerouting the railroad around Fairbanks, what exactly is that going to do to improve freight flow?
Jackson, can I put you on a spot? Put you on the spot. I think you're probably most familiar with this plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really an unrealistic project to see in our lifetime. But the idea is eliminating a large number of the rail crossings on the road network through the urban area. But that's something that's of interest. But again, I don't think a realistic project that would move forward anytime soon.
So knowing that this freight plan gets updated every 4 years and really can be amended in between that, would you say that that should come off as a priority project?
Well, politically in Fairbanks, priority project, but again, it's not realistic. So if it disappears out of the plan, I'm okay with that.
I'm sort of in the same boat. It's a political hot potato, but realistically, I think there's a lot of other stuff that could be done to sort of ameliorate some of the problems on an individual basis for a fraction of what that project is going to require.
Okay, perfect. So we'll take that off the list, but we'll keep it in the plan and the illustrative projects so it stays documented and doesn't get lost, but it won't probably bubble up as a priority.
I think that's a good plan.
Okay, thank you.
I agree.
All right, Jody again.
One other project to consider, as we shore up the link between the port and the airport, and considering UPS, DHL, FedEx, and the community that lies between the port and the airport, we might want to consider, is there a way to reroute traffic? Is there a freight corridor that needs to be better identified so that the industrial users are using it rather than rolling through Northern Lights or on Spenard Road, or Raspberry? I don't know, but I can see that coming up maybe in 4 years, depending on what kind of development happens. I mean, it bubbles up here and there all the time anyway. Thank you.
Well, I guess to that comment, I guess I've got two questions. Well, number one, there already is a freight corridor. The railroad goes between those 2 points. But how much freight other than fuel, which is pipe, goes between the airport and the port now, and how is that projected to change? Because I see those two, the port's kind of big, heavy, medium priority stuff, and stuff coming off airplanes is usually throw it in the truck to get it there now type of stuff.
I think what we're seeing more of is the residential delivery trucks. And so you're seeing a lot more of the residential packages going out to people. And so you're seeing an increase in that kind of freight. And I think also that, we're trying to be forward thinking, and as our world changes, is that freight going to continue to change? Are there, that sea to port, is that going to start happening? So I'm going to turn this over to Joe and Steve, who can talk a lot more intelligently about these. So Joe and then Steve.
I would add a different comment besides the freight that would be shipped up here and then driven to the airport to fly somewhere, or flown in here and then driven to the port to be shipped somewhere. So I'll defer. I have comments separate from that.
Maybe Steve, do you want to comment on that, or?
Yeah, I'm happy to give you an additional vague response to the
Go for
question.
it.
Yeah, and because of the fact that there's quite a bit of what falls under the bypass mail concept that comes in on the ocean carriers every week, that's the substance of what's making its way to the airport. Because they'll go down to those areas where the containers are opened up and the contents of it are palletized and taken to the airport for shipment to bush communities as part of the bypass mail system. We don't have fidelity on those volumes, but the port ocean carriers do, because they have the business contracts for that. And that's information that we don't get any detail information on, but we get the overall volumes of what comes across the dock, not who their shippers are and who gets what portion of those volumes. So there may be an opportunity to, if it's necessary to have that kind of fidelity, you would have to go to the ocean carriers and ask them if they would be interested in sharing, what they're bringing in as part of the bypass mail system and where it's going next. If that
Thanks,
makes any
Steve.
sense.
Thank you, Steve.
Good clarity,
Okay.
Steve. Thank you.
Okay, let's go back to Joe.
My comment is, we've identified the Chulitna and the Eagle River Bridge, by name, but it just says bridges on the Richardson Highway. Have we identified certain bridges? I know that, there's a bridge list, and this isn't a cheeky comment, but should we ask Fort Knox to pay for some of those bridges that were being improved on the Richardson Highway? Because the reason I'm saying that is, there are bridges that need to be improved. There's definitely a specific interest with Richardson Highway bridge improvements. And, when this process started, a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was a big advocate for game-changing projects. We nickel and dime, we split our buckets out, we split our buckets down, and that we end up having these tiny little projects that make incremental improvements in the transportation scheme of things. And I'm not saying we put all of our, pour all of our buckets completely into the Parks Highway Alternative Corridor / Wasilla bypass, but I'm concerned about why we're improving certain bridges on the Richardson Highway if they're not, prioritized as real freight movement. And I just think the sooner you can get a Wasilla bypass, the sooner it really is a game changer for transportation in Alaska. That's my comment.
Yeah, so we aren't recommending these as priorities yet. That's what this discussion's about. This is just what's been tossed out there. So that's a great comment. Can I would it be a priority of this group to improve movement from the Port of Alaska, in and out of the Port of Alaska, to connect all the modes? So really the Ocean Dock Road reconnaissance study. Is that project a priority from this group's perspective?
I think that project individually is, but I think it's part of a broader range of projects, basically between the port and the railroad and the highway. It is certainly one of the biggest bottlenecks, congestion points, so on and so forth, but all it's going to do is then draw attention to the other bottlenecks, which is Whitney Road, the intersection of Whitney and Post, the intermodal facility over there at Whitney and Post, and eventually, potentially, getting across Commercial Boulevard on Reeves to get to the highway. It's not until you get past Merrill Field, that your bottlenecks between the port and the rest of Alaska really start to clear up.
I don't.
Yeah, I'll just agree with Brian. So if you really want to eliminate bottlenecks, you got to start at the port, because we're narrowed down to 2 lanes, and I'm going to use some generic counts here. You've got about 8,000 plus transactions that are taking place. I'll pare that down. It's under 5,000, but you've got a lot of transactions taking place at the Port of Anchorage, coming around through the rail area and going below the AC couplet and onto the AC couplet. And if you can solve that and get that freight to where it's headed up out the Glen or down C Street, I mean, really, those are the two main arteries out of the port. And
right,
it's a mess. I mean, and the guys that are driving that route every day, they're used to it. It's slow. We don't really have much in the way of accidents, but that's where the attention needs to be focused for a plan, and the funding needs to take place. I know it's been looked at a number of times. We haven't really made much in the way of progress, but that is really the pinch point to the highways, to the airport, and south Anchorage. So I'll leave it at that.
And
I will endorse what Mike Thrasher just said, as well as what Brian
Okay.
said. I mean, it's a 5-pound bag, and there's approaching 15 pounds of what that needs to be managed in that area down there, and it's just ill-designed to make it any more efficient than what you've got right now, and that's what's
But that's where your bottlenecks expand, because one of the bottlenecks we have is our intermodal facility and the amount of freight that we are able to move, trailers able to move. The fact of the matter is we're turning trailers away every week to go over the road because we don't have the capacity to take them all. We're already handling nearly 50% of the Anchorage to Fairbanks moves now, and we could probably handle more, but we don't have the equipment, we don't have the capacity in our yard.
Hey, Brian.
When I talk about bottlenecks, we need to look at all the bottlenecks.
Yeah. Hey, Brian, I'm just going to support you here. So I won't admit to being out on the roads in an RV and obstructing traffic, but I've done a couple of trips around the Horn this summer. The more cargo that we can put on the rail northbound out of Anchorage, that just eliminates a ton of traffic off of the highways. I mean, going north or south on the parks as a tourist, whether you're in a bus, an RV, or a car, man, it is and I don't know who's taking any trips this summer up the parks or south on the parks. It is very, very congested. I'm not sure I would call it a leisurely trip. You got to be on your toes. So shifting that mode to rail out of Anchorage and southbound out of Fairbanks, I think could have a great impact. But back to Brian's point, you got to have the equipment to handle the capacity.
One of the things that we've been, talking about with the railroad and with the 2 port ocean carriers is moving some of that rail car loading onto the port, because we have space in the back to create a trailer on flat car operation if it pencils out for the railroad and the users to make it so. And I don't know where that would fit into the construct of things here, but maybe a feasibility study to get it started is called for, and then we can decide whether there's value and the savings really is, what we think the savings might be if we do that. And that takes X number of container movements off of that portion of the road, particularly the Whitney Road part of it. But I don't know enough about the numbers to throw something at you today. But I think that's a viable option for taking some of that truck traffic off the roads down there. Unless you guys want to violently disagree with me, feel free. But that's sort of where the port has landed on this. We will make the space available if it pencils out as a good business decision that we can defend.
Okay, so I was just
I
gonna
just
say to
have a follow-up.
summarize.
Can I just ask a question? Maybe I
Yeah.
missed it. Is the bottleneck related to the railroad? Is that infrastructure related, or is it equipment related, or is it both? Is it both? Okay.
It's both. I mean, the bottom line is our existing facility is relatively constrained. And, we can add more equipment, and we do when we can to get more space, particularly on the heavy volume days. But we can add, 50 more cars, but then I'm going to have a problem of just, getting them all loaded in time. And, one of the other bottlenecks, again, on the ocean side is, they've got the shoal to get over. And when that backs up boats coming into the port, then we suddenly start getting late call times, and then suddenly we're delaying trains because everybody's trying to get the stuff off the boat and over to us as fast as they can. But there's for stuff to get here for early morning delivery in Fairbanks, the train's got to leave by a certain time or it's just not going to get here. And anything that we can do to reduce the amount of time from when we can load the last trailer to that train departing is going to help the situation from a constraint standpoint. And what we have right now, it takes a long time to pull all those tracks and put them all back together again and get air and get out. And so, again, this is an infrastructure issue. It's an equipment issue. It's a road issue. It's a port issue, but they're all interrelated and they affect things all the way up here to Fairbanks.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, so in summary, because I want to make sure we hear from some other folks too. So in summary, what I'm hearing right now is a general consensus, and I'm just going to call it the Ocean Dock project for ease, but that should be a #1 priority because it truly is touching all the modes. It's going to affect what happens at the airport, the port, the railroad, and with trucking. And so that area is a #1 priority. The second priority I'm hearing is a feasibility study to probably assess what's happening with the railroad related to the port. And I think we could actually put in the Anchorage International Airport in there as well, as freight changes, as it increases, as we're looking to sea to port, what kind of new infrastructure do we need, and is there new equipment? So a feasibility study to link all of the modes in a more efficient and better way. Do we agree on those two in our top 5 projects right now?
I can support that.
Okay. So we want to also hear from Southeast. We want to hear from up north in Fairbanks, some priority projects up there.
So Wendy, Robert had a comment. Maybe Robert, do you want to talk? Go ahead. I'll let you speak.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was trying to yield for time and management of everybody that wants to say something today, but I fully support. We understand in Southeast we're only 10% of the population, 10% of the economy, but this is a statewide plan. So I'm the Southeast guy, and so it's here to wave that flag. So certainly support everything I've heard today so far, but just realizing that our freight corridor, which is also important to Fairbanks and the highway and the rest of the state, has needs for infrastructure development as well. And so I just want to make sure that gets recognized as we take a look, at the freight corridors, the backside of Douglas getting developed, second crossing, and getting road segments built up either the east side or west side You know, it may be multimodal, but there's some very significant pieces to moving freight that could really help efficiencies and cost reductions, you know, for the region and the state. So I just want to put that out there. Thanks.
Thanks, Robert.
Okay, go ahead, Aves.
Good afternoon. I'm thinking of the previous description of the top priorities, and basically those are long-term plans, and I wonder if we might want to focus on some of the shorter-term solutions, such as truck parking, such as bridges on both the Richardson's and the Parks Highway. You know, those kind of projects can be done in a relatively short period of time. The Wasilla bypass or some of the other rail illustrations are going to take a lot of time, and they're multi-year projects. And so I think we need to remember there's a balance between long-term solutions and shorter-term solutions.
Excellent point. Before we jump into truck parking, Jackson, do you have anything to add in terms of what you'd like to see as priority projects from your area?
So, I mean, I see that we're still on the statewide slide, but I guess I can kind of speak generally about our area here, because for Fairbanks, obviously, what's most important to us is the Dalton Highway and that freight movement moving north and coming back south. But as Joe mentioned kind of earlier in the meeting, we do have a couple bridges of concern with, you know, oversized or overweight loads going over some of these bridges, and there are alternate routes, but the Steese Highway bridge over the Chena River, and then the overpass at the Chena Hot Springs Road. Again, there are alternate routes. The Hot Springs Road can be bypassed going through some roundabouts, and the Steese Highway bridge can be bypassed by routing through our urban area, going up Pegger Road and through the Johansson, et cetera. But I guess in the short term, we're looking at the ore haul from Kinross running through our area, beginning in 24 through 2028. So that kind of amplifies those concerns about those bridge locations, but also up the Steese Highway, closer to the Kinross mine. There is a hairpin turn on the Steese Highway that kind of prohibits double trailers from making that maneuver up there. So anyways, at the forefront of our mind right now is short-term projects to accommodate the ore haul, and it seems like could be a list of improvements here in Fairbanks that should be listed in this plan for consideration of short-term high priority projects to pave the way, so to speak, for this new operation.
Thank you, Jackson. And I have the list of the Fairbanks area ones, Northern Region ones, and I don't remember if our original list was that specific on some of the hairpin turns and bridges related to the ore movement, Jackson. So we may follow up with you on those.
No, those were not identified in our 2019 freight mobility plan.
Okay.
Because that was not something that we had in the forecast, but is very much in the forefront of our minds right now.
Okay, perfect. So let's move over to truck parking a little bit. And Eric, you and I talked a little bit about truck parking. Could you give an overview of, there is no DOT sponsored truck parking right now. And, our criteria says, why do we have inadequate parking? I think most of us know it's rural, it's challenging, but do you want to kind of do an introduction to DOT and truck parking?
Yes, good morning. Yeah, I think the whole issue of truck parking is, it's got national attention. And from the standpoint of a lot of other states, they're looking at the whole issue of providing adequate rest for trucks, looking to conversion of trucks to the electric vehicle powertrains, and so they're, I guess they're taking kind of a global or a big picture approach to it, where looking at massive facilities for rest and charging and that sort of thing. And it's also recognized, across the nation that there are insufficient facilities for accommodating that, currently. In Alaska, we're probably not anywhere near that, in terms of those sorts of logistical concerns. But what we do here is the need for drivers to have space where they can pull over and get the rest they needed, and also for places to fuel. They need to keep their engines running, particularly in the winter because of the cold factor. So there's a number of considerations to be concerned about. And I think, what Wendy and I discussed was the idea that it needs to be something along the lines of a partnership where the different freight movers look at the particular need and maybe pool some funds, and look at how they can do that cooperatively. So, I think one of the things we looked at is, if we're going to study this issue, we need to get a number of people who are, who are stakeholders in that issue together, and figure out what sort of things we can do cooperatively to provide the space we need. So, you've got a land use concern, you've got traffic engineering concerns, all those things that kind of go in. And then we have, of course, you have to identify the optimal locations that would actually serve people or serve the drivers. So I don't have much more to say than that at this point.
Yeah, so right now the freight plan recommends a parking study to assess where they're really needed. So, because I don't think a comprehensive look at the state has been done. It seems like we need to be a little bit more thorough in our analysis, a parking study. And I think Catherine is on the call from FHWA, if we need actual locations as a recommendation, or if a parking study is acceptable as a recommendation.
Hi, this is Catherine.
Thanks, Catherine.
Yeah, of course. So, official guidance hasn't come out beyond what the legislation says or regulations say about that specifically. In my opinion, I guess, or from my point of view, kind of, if you don't have that analysis done right now, talking about what you plan to do to address that will likely be a sufficient way to go about that, since we know it's kind of an early way to an early time to implement the bill, and I know there's a lot going on with that. So from my point of view, it's at least talking to what the plan is to identify those areas.
Perfect, thank you. Looks like Abe and then Joe.
Hi, Abe's again. I would echo Eric's comments that we need to figure out where the parking is needed. And there have been some suggestions in the past about locations. I don't think we've drill down enough to figure out just exactly where those, you know, it's a matter of hours of service. It's a matter of the driver has to stop to meet those hours of service requirements, and they need a safe place to stop. And so is it near Anchorage? Is it near Fairbanks? Is it up north somewhere? Surely we need to ask the carriers and figure out where it is that those truck parking locations need to be.
Joe, did you want to add to that? You're on mute, Joe. You're on mute if you want to talk.
Rookie move. I completely agree with Aves. The one thing that I want to stress is there's a lot of federal dollars right now available for truck parking. So if a study, and that's, you have to figure out, you know, measure twice before you cut once. That study needs to be done and accomplished so we can be ready for next year's round of funding before this bucket of ducats and this romance with truck parking kind of fades away from the public's sphere. Because I don't think it's gonna, the next major, you know, transportation thing, truck parking might not be the big romance thing that the bucket of ducats will be available for. So if this study happens, we can get this study done. It's not that hard to ask all the carriers and look at a map of Alaska. We can get that done, you know, 3-6 months. That way we're available for next year's round of funding.
Okay, so right now for the top 5 projects, we have Ocean Dock. We have a feasibility study for the rail, port, trucking, airport kind of movement, offloading infrastructure and equipment. We have, I'm just going to call it Jackson, kind of the Dalton Highway ore haul improvements, and that goes down to the Stees. We've got a truck parking.
Not Dalton Highway.
Pardon?
Not the Dalton Highway.
Not just
Dalton
the
Highway.
Stees. Okay.
This would be Tetland to Fort Knox, but specific to our area. Yeah, our concern is the Stees Highway.
Okay, Stees Highway. Thank you for that clarification. And then we have a truck parking study. Is everyone comfortable with that list right now for DOT to start looking at and putting some numbers to and taking back to each of the regions to discuss in more detail as a recommendation from this committee?
Go ahead, Joe.
In regards to Fairbanks, there are bridges along the Stees, and getting freight across those things up the Dalton Highway, up to you know, the oil fields. I just want to make sure that Fairbanks is not completely weighed in on the Mon Show project, Tetland to Fort Knox. And I just want to be clear that, you know, that's not in the top 5 priority until Fairbanks population decides that they're down with that whole thing. So I just want to separate. You accidentally included that, but Stees, Dalton, yes, that's what I have to say. Sorry about interrupting.
Okay. And these are recommendations that are going to go back to DOT, and they're going to kind of look at them in the bigger spectrum of things. They're going to look at them at projects that are already on the STIP as well. So, you know, we're kind of focusing on freight. Some of these projects may already be addressed under other funding mechanisms with the STIP. So we kind of want to get a good list, and then we'll kind of work through and come up with the best ones to maximize the funding for all of these different projects. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of different funding pots. So understanding your priorities just really helps them put everything in the right bucket, so to speak. So we can get a little bit of everything. Any other comments on the priority projects? What about the Parks Highway Wasilla bypass as a freight priority? Thoughts? I know Joe's a fan.
Every passing day, it's going to be more and more impossible to get that thing through.
And also, I think, you know, as we're thinking about this, a large part of all of this federal funding is about resiliency. You know, how can we strengthen those routes? How can we minimize risk? you go back to those new requirements, you know, how do we look at freight corridors in terms of minimizing risk from flooding, improving air quality, really thinking about equity. Are we getting, you know, how do we get freight to communities that are a little more, they're smaller? So how do we strengthen the corridors there? Those projects are going to rank higher in terms of funding for grants, at least. You know, formula funding, they'll still do well, but a lot of the grant funding is really looking at these resiliency issues too, and having, you know, more than one route, more than one mode. All right, are we done with this? We feel good about what we're recommending to DOT? And then we'll certainly look at the Southeast. We'll take a look at, you know, the recommendations there too. All right. So, well, somebody clapped. I don't know. Oh, Holly, she doesn't count. All right, Eric and James, is that what you were looking for? Does that give you a little bit better guidance as we come forward with this fiscally constrained list of projects? Do you feel comfortable with what you heard, or do you have some more questions for the committee?
This is Eric. I guess I would like to you know, hit on Bob Sherrill and see if he had anything from defense logistics perspective, if there's anything we're missing or if we're hitting the right buttons here.
Okay, this is Bob, and really the key areas for the military has been the port and the port access and the port freight movement. But also when you talked about the parking on the Richardson and on the Parks highways, when our big trucks are heading up there, when we're sending in convoys, we need the parking to go off and consolidate and have the temporary rests, and also let other traffic go through, because they don't go at you know, at high speeds. So I see what you're addressing, and I think we're right on. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Do you have any documentation of how much space you need when those convoys go? How many?
I don't have the, yeah, I don't have the specifics, and but I know who to go ask. But most of the time they're running 10 to 15 large trucks. So, and otherwise they're running smaller ones. But that's really the key for us is we were having a lot of exercises, you know, up the Richardson, and so they spread it out. They try to make it so it's best for everyone, and they apply their requirements through the corridors as they have to do, and make sure it's all approved.
Are there any security requirements associated with those, or would they be open to all truckers and potentially tourists in their RVs?
I would think it'd be open.
Okay.
Yeah, they have their own security.
Okay, perfect. Great input. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is Eric again. I just, you know, I think this has been a really valuable discussion, and it certainly helped to sort some things out for me.
Perfect. All right, then we will move into just general comments on the freight plan. If you had general feedback, I know I've talked to a couple of you just kind of offline about some odd data concerns. Sometimes the freight data gets reported differently to the Corps of Engineers and to the feds versus what your numbers have. We're going to try to put some qualifiers and clean up the data. But just now looking for general feedback on the freight plan, 3 things you liked, 3 things you change, and how can the freight advisory continue to support DOT in their freight planning efforts in the future. And I can kind of kick the last question off. The intent is this freight advisory committee will stay together, and continue to, if you so choose to continue to serve on it, we would have a meeting sometime in the probably early winter, January, early spring, establish some bylaws, and then you would continue to provide statewide feedback to DOT as a formal freight committee. So the idea is this group will continue on. So at this point, we'd just like to open it up for general comments. Again, we need to have a revised freight plan submitted to FHWA by October 27th. That will keep the funds flowing in. And remember, it's updated every 4 years and it can be amended throughout the process. So it's never done, which is good because it's always changing. As Jackson mentioned, we have new concerns already. So any overall feedback?
Does the same deadline apply for just this long-range transportation plan?
No, it does not. So the long-range transportation plan, the comment period on that is open until October 31st. So it's out for public comment right now. It will close October 31st. We'll gather all the comments and make revisions and likely wrap that up with the holidays. It'll probably be in January. We might make the end of this year.
Hey, Wendy, this is Jackson here. I've got I guess a general comment, a general question. First of all, the general comment. I really like the freight plan, how it's laid out. It's very easy to read, understand, follow. I like a lot of the graphics in there. Anyway, so just pat yourself on the back there. I think you guys did a great job pulling that together. My question is for the Anchorage area. I see there's some proposed critical urban freight corridors shown in Figure 8. I guess I'm curious if those proposed corridors have been submitted to Federal Highways for designation.
Eric, James, can you respond to that?
This is Eric. They have not. I'm still looking for an official letter from the AMETS. I'm assuming that would be the policy board or the freight committee. That's something we can take in writing and then go ahead and make that request, forward that request to Federal Highways. It does have to be approved through Federal Highways.
This is Aaron with AMETS. We sent something already regarding these, so I guess I need to follow up on what happened with that. So I'll look into it and get back with you guys.
Perfect. Anything else?
I have a general comment. This is Jody. I just want to thank you guys. I know that this has been somewhat painful this time around to really try to incorporate all of the modes. And I appreciate that there's been a lot of effort put into better representing and really trying to tie modes together and address multimodal. So thank you for that. And I think this plan is a very good start for going forward. It provides a good solid foundation, I think, for continuing work with multimodal and how do we work together better as a state to serve our people. So thank you.
Thank you, Jody. Well, that sounds like that's it. I would have to say, if you have any additional comments or burning things you want to share, we would need those by, I would say, October 7th, no later than October 7th, for any final comments from this group. I know many of you are also in the statewide advisory committee. We're meeting next week to talk more in depth about the long-range transportation plan. If you're not on that committee as well, you're certainly welcome to join us and provide feedback on that. Again, those comments are due October 31st. So, Eric and James, is there, if we could take just a few more minutes, if nobody else has any other comments.
I think Brian Funkhauser has his hand up. Go ahead,
Oh,
Brian.
perfect.
Yeah, just going back to the critical urban, critical rural freight corridor comment, just a point that Bill has dramatically increased the allocation of mileage that's available to the states. I think in Alaska's case, you have around 600 miles that are now that would be eligible for critical rural freight corridors and 150 miles for critical urban freight corridors. So I think that's in light of that, I think that would be an important implementation activity for this group going forward as part of plan implementation, to be looking at additional priority freight segments for designation by the state and eventual certification by FHWA. Something to keep in front of you.
All right. I guess with that, that is everything in our agenda. James and Eric, did you have anything else for the Freight Advisory Committee before we wrap it up?
This is Eric. I didn't have anything more at this point. I'll defer to James.
This is Joe Michelle with Alaska Trucking Association. It looks as if we all got together, we had a bunch of meetings, and we agreed the priorities were 5 more studies. And I don't think we actually have a road project in our priorities.
I scanned the pants twice. How do... Oh, I gotcha. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Hey, Brian, mute yourself, please. Or I'll do it.
So I think that Ocean Dock Road is a real project, right? There's already been a reconnaissance study. There's a lot done there. The feasibility study for the railroad, that is a planning study. You are correct. I think that the Dalton, I don't know if any, I'm sorry, the Steves Highway Jackson. I took bad notes. I don't think there have been any. I think those are still planning. I think those could go into design probably. So those could potentially be real projects to address those issues.
I'm just being cheeky, Wendy. We all got together and DOT's going to break ground on projects. There's going to be new roads every year. So I'm just kind of being cheeky.
I know, but I kind of like what you said. So I want to make sure we can make some of these projects and they're not all studies, because we all like to be doers. All right, I guess with that, that's it. You probably will just hear from us via email until, like I said, early next year, and we'll reconvene and we'll keep you updated on the progress. Mark, did you have something to say?
I just have a question for the Freight Advisory Committee, and I hope I'm not creating maybe additional work for James, but would it be helpful? Do you guys look at the STIP and the amendments that come out in the amount of, in a great enough detail that having some way to identify a project as being on a freight corridor or the freight highway system, so that you can see that the state is addressing some of these projects that are important to you. In other words, just to have a way to identify it as a freight project. Would that be helpful to the Freight Advisory Committee?
Yes.
So thank you. And I think to Mark's comment there, we can certainly identify those as freight projects. A lot of times we can do that in the funding lines using the NHFP funding. But yeah, that's something we can certainly do and we can strive to do as we get these projects in the STIP.
All right, and that might be a great role moving forward with the Freight Advisory Committee to have a larger role in the STIP and kind of take a look at those projects as they're getting nominated. right, well, thank you for your time. You get 20 minutes back today. Again, please get any comments to us by October 7th if you have anything that you would like changed. And remember, it's a 4-year plan, can be amended anytime as we, in this ever-changing world. I think we have to be more flexible and nimble than ever as we do these plans. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to the team. We're here to answer them. We're here to respond and be helpful. So you'll hear from us via email as we continue to get this plan in place. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ciao.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.